Harry Brown famously said, "The government is good at one thing. It knows how to break your legs, hand you a crutch, and say, 'See, if it weren't for the government, you wouldn't be able to walk.'" To put that into a modern Australian context, the government is good at one thing. It knows how to drive up inflation and the cost of living by a lot, and then increase the minimum wage by a little and say, "See, if it weren't for the government, you wouldn't be able to pay your bills." Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is incredibly proud of how his government has increased the minimum wage. Just check out how often he posts about it on social media. Thing is, though, he doesn't pay for any of that increase. Employers do, which means we all pay for it in our own cost of living. So Albanese is bragging about how he's saving us from the high cost of living by making the cost of living higher. Instead of bragging about how high the minimum wage has become, he should be asking why it's necessary for the minimum wage to be so high in the first place. So let's ask that question, shall we? Why does the minimum wage need to be among the very highest in the world, and yet still somehow it's not enough to keep up with the rapidly rising cost of living? Why is that? Well, because stagflation is here, that's why. My name is Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to understand the world as it changes around you. And importantly, to understand the moment that we are in. I am 100% viewer supported, and I appreciate every single one of you who buys me a coffee via the button on my website, topherfield.net, and those of you who buy copies of my books, my DVDs, my t-shirts, and my hoodies from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. You guys are keeping me going, and I really appreciate it. Now, the economic numbers in Australia are grim. You probably already knew that, but I'll go through a few key ones in a second. But where I'm going with this is that we've entered a thing called stagflation, or a stagnant economy with high inflation, and that's not supposed to be possible under Keynesian economic theory. But it is possible because Keynesian economic theory is nonsense. The trouble is that Keynesian economic theory is the theory by which Australia, and indeed every Western country, is being run today, and that spells big trouble for our futures. So let's start with some information that unfortunately makes for pretty grim reading, and yet it won't come as any sort of a surprise to you, I'm sure. Our per capita real disposable income, that's per person and after inflation, has collapsed faster than any other developed country in the world. If you feel like you have plenty of dollars, but they don't seem to buy you very much, well, that's why. Because after inflation, disposable incomes are down to pre-pandemic levels officially, but that's using the official inflation figures, which are pure fantasy. Actual inflation is way higher than what the CPI figure would suggest, meaning that in actual inflation-adjusted terms, our disposable income has collapsed probably twice as far as what this chart would suggest. Now, when I talk about real inflation versus the CPI, the official inflation, people don't always get that they are very different things. So let me illustrate with the cost of renting in this country. Yep. That is insane price growth in the last few years. Renting a house has jumped in cost by 50 to 60% in the last few years, but the official CPI inflation over that period was less than a cumulative 20%. So if you're a renter, CPI is an irrelevant figure for you. This is what matters because the math just doesn't math. And whilst it's true that there are plenty of jobs around in this economy, the reality is that those jobs are not productive in the economic sense. Yes, money changes hands, so that contributes to the GDP. But, well, for example, an NDIS worker helping people to go shopping. Well, it's not the same as a steel fabricator making panels for cars. And don't argue with me about that in the comments. Oh, it's so valuable, it's so important that we do these things. Hey, if you want to do charity work and help people to shop, by all means, be my guest, but do it on your own time. Don't pretend that this is some dignified way to earn a living or that you're actually adding real economic value into the Australian economy. If you think it's really all that important, then volunteer for it. If you won't volunteer for it, then maybe you don't think it's actually all that important, you just like the money. See, the vast overwhelming majority of the jobs being created in this country are government jobs, shown in yellow on this graph. These are jobs that create little to no real, actual economic value. But we have these jobs, and they're being funded by debt. So our children and our grandchildren will be paying off the salaries of these unproductive jobs, paying people to go shopping with other people in this year, and they'll be paying for it for decades to come. And real jobs, actually productive jobs that make things that people actually want and need, well, they're almost non-existent here in Australia. Manufacturing as a percentage of GDP is barely 5%, and with the cost of electricity being what it is, we're not about to get our manufacturing sector back. Nor are we about to gain a whole lot of high-tech jobs either, because tech, well, it requires electricity, and it is simply not possible to compete in a global tech marketplace on our electricity prices. The numbers are grim. The numbers are grim. There's no sugarcoating it. And yes, we could still turn this around in probably 12 months or less if our politicians had the will. But why would they stick their necks out when clearly, given the results of the last federal election, this is what Australians want? If we want a Javier Milei to come and save us from this economic mess, we must first become the kinds of people who would vote for and support a Javier Milei to wield that chainsaw. And sadly, as a group, we are very, very far away from being those people. So that's the reality check. That's where we are at right now. But what's this I'm saying about stagflation and Keynesian economic theory? Well, John Maynard Keynes was an economist who got everything wrong. But he's tremendously popular with politicians because he basically said that the government is the solution to all of our problems, when real economists like Ludwig von Mises and Henry Hazlitt and lots of other people with brain cells were correctly pointing out that economically, the government can basically do nothing other than just get out of the way. And anytime the government helps, they are making things worse. Well, unsurprisingly, governments worldwide decided to listen to Keynes. Now, I'm going to grossly oversimplify everything here, but in a nutshell, Keynes said that you can control an economy if you have a central bank that controls interest rates. The theory goes that if you expand the supply of money, then you'll increase economic activity with it and vice versa. So if the economy is not doing so well, you just have the central bank lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper. As a result, more people, more businesses will borrow more money, increasing the money supply, stimulating the economy, and vice versa. If the economy gets overheated, by which I mean if inflation gets too high, then you can pull it back down by increasing Reserve Bank interest rates, which will cause people to stop borrowing. The money supply stops growing or perhaps even shrinks, and then the economy cools down again. In other words, Keynes's theory says that you can either have inflation along with a booming economy, or you can have stagnation, which will by definition mean low inflation. His theory says that you cannot have stagflation, a stagnant economy, with high real inflation. He says those things are mutually exclusive. And if he's right, and only if he's right about that, then you can control the whole economy by controlling interest rates. And that theory sounds so nice and so neat, and politicians love it because it makes them feel like they have control over this huge and mysterious thing called an economy. But the fact is, it's bollocks, because it invites ever-increasing government deficits. Governments fall for this conceit that they can just print their way out of trouble, and then bam, before you know it, you arrive at the exact moment that we are in right now in Australia, stagflation, a stagnant economy with high inflation. You see, the thing that Keynes missed is that the important part of an economy isn't how much money there is or even how fast that money is moving. It's actually how productive the members within that economy are. Keynesian economics doesn't care what you spend your money on as long as you spend it. It's like a game of monetary musical chairs, but the whole game is just to keep that money moving at all costs, irrespective of whether what's being purchased with that money has any kind of value at all. In other words, in the Keynesian model, the economy is the money. But in the real world, the economy is the other side of every transaction. You see, every transaction has two sides. On one side, money moves in one direction. On the other side, a product or a service moves the other way. The bit that we actually care about, those of us in the economy, is the other side of this transaction. It's the value that we're getting in return for our money. The money side of it is just a way of getting the, housing, food, clothing, entertainment, or whatever it is that we like and enjoy. That's what we want. It's the bit that matters to us. But inflation means that we get less of this for the same amount of money. So the money changing hands actually ends up increasing, but our quality of life declines, despite the number of dollars flying around being as high or even higher than ever before. And that is where Australia is right now. But we've actually reached a really dangerous tipping point. You see, there comes a point where the government has taken on so much of its own debt that when they raise interest rates to try and slow the economy down, slow down inflation, they increase their own interest rate repayments by more than what they slowed down private sector borrowing. So at that point, increasing interest rates, it no longer just doesn't work very well as a lever to control the economy. It actually backfires. And instead of increasing interest rates leading to a decrease in the volume of money, it leads to an increase in the volume of money because now, thanks to that higher interest rate, the government has to print or borrow, they are the same thing, more money just to keep up with its own interest rates. That is the Keynesian death spiral, and we're in it right now. The Australian government will continue to manipulate the CPI figures to keep inflation looking low so they can keep interest rates low to try and slow down this runaway train. But the fact is, this train has already gotten away from them and they are not going to get it back. Now, it's not actually too late to save us if we're willing to face our problems and take our economic medicine in the form of mercilessly slashing government spending, slashing welfare, slashing regulation, etc. But we're not willing to do that. Which means our politicians, the ones who imagined themselves to be the train drivers, they've lost any and all control of inflation and the economy. And I'm talking real inflation, not the official manipulated stuff. They can control that. Money is now flying around in Australia faster and more than ever before, but everybody is poorer than they can remember being in at least the last 20 or 30 years. And if that sounds familiar to you, if that sounds like what you're living, then hear me when I say that this is just the beginning. So then comes the question, what do you do about it? Well, to be completely clear, I'm not a financial advisor, so what I'm about to say is just generic observations and thoughts based on history. But also, I'm not about to try and sell you anything. I have no dog in this fight. I'm not going to pitch crypto or gold or anything to you. Well, okay, other than my books and my merch. I will definitely pitch these to you because I've got bills to pay. But I'm not trying to profit off fear-mongering. I'm not going to sell you a course on what to do with your money. I'm not going to sell you crypto or gold or any of that nonsense. Nothing. I have no dog in this fight. I'm just here to help you understand the times that we're in. And maybe, just maybe, give you some information that's going to help you to be wise about how you choose to respond. Okay. In times of stagflation, it is my personal opinion that you need to focus on two things. Assets which are a hedge against inflation, i.e. their value goes up as the dollar loses its value. And the second thing to focus on is income that is in present day dollars and adjusts for inflation in real time. Now I'll touch on both and explain both briefly. Assets which hedge against inflation include things like real estate, precious metals, and even some kinds of shares in industries and businesses which are particularly resilient to recessions. And these days it could also maybe include Bitcoin, although that does still drop every time there's a period of economic uncertainty, which indicates to me that people are probably still using Bitcoin primarily speculatively rather than as a hedge. But then again, over the long term, Bitcoin has proven to be a pretty consistent grower, even through the bad times as well as the good. So it's worth thinking about, okay? I'm not advising anything. There's no pitch coming. There's no link, affiliate, whatever. Just look at history, have a look at your own personal circumstances, and have a think about what assets you, in your opinion, think you could move into that might be a good hedge against inflation. Because if it's been a good hedge against inflation in the past, then yeah, it might be a suitable hedge against inflation for you in the present, but that's up to you. But that's only of use if you have money to buy assets with, equity or something to put into those assets. For those of us that are broke and don't have any assets, well, we need present day income. See, the funny thing about periods of really high inflation, and especially a stagflation like what we're heading into, is that money continues to move and move fast. And in fact, if I'm right, then over the next 10 plus years, there will be more money flying around than any of us have ever seen before. The trouble is that that money won't be able to buy very much. See, as inflation kicks in, people don't want to hold on to their money anymore. Money punishes you for saving. If inflation is, let's say, 50% per annum, then that $1,000 that I saved at the start of the year only has the purchasing power of $660 by the end of the year, which means I'm better off spending it now, the minute I get that money. Historically, when inflation really kicks in, people are literally running to go and spend their money as fast as they can. the same day that they get paid if they can, because if they wait until tomorrow, prices will have gone up even more. Now, that is what happens in the extreme cases, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, etc. We're a long way away from that. But the point is, in the era we're entering, money won't be hard to come by if you can offer any sort of value in return. And in fact, you don't have to offer a lot of value for it, because the high inflation compels people to spend the money they have on something, anything, as fast as they can. But there are some caveats here, because what I'm really talking about is some sort of a side hustle, home business, small business, something that doesn't require you to carry a lot of stock, something that makes use of assets that you already own outright or have fixed interest rate loans on. For example, simple example, if you already own your lawnmower, then as long as you can get petrol for it, you're good. Because as money loses its value, as people become increasingly desperate to spend whatever cash they have each month, each week, or ultimately when it gets really bad every day, as fast as they can, well, if you can provide any kind of value to them, then they'll throw that money at you. Because if they wait until tomorrow, then that money's going to buy even less. The key is that it has to be a business that is what I call lightweight. It can't impose huge overheads and costs onto you or require expensive restocking. And I would suggest that you think carefully about whether you'd want to get involved in a business that has international supply lines. If it requires importing, well, that introduces lag and delays and some regulatory challenges in the world that we're heading into. So maybe have a think about whether that's a good idea. You want to be able to create a product or a service in real time, which is paid for by the client in real time and then restocked by you in real time. You don't want to be restocking in a month, trying to use the money from a sale that you made today, because in a month's time, the money that you got for today's sale won't cover the cost of the restock, plus that month's worth of inflation. You get the idea. Now, you'll notice that I haven't talked about having a job. In a high inflation economy, and there's two good reasons for that. Whilst having a job is better than not having a job, if you are relying on your job in a high inflation economy, your whole future is at the mercy of a boss or a company that is also fighting for their own survival. That means that cuts and layoffs are going to happen. Not a great situation to be in. But there's a second reason. Salaries and wages will not keep up with inflation. They will not even come close. Now, they'll be indexed to CPI or maybe CPI plus 1% or something like that. But as I've already shown with that rental graph, it's not going to keep up with real cost of living. Just like what I said at the start of this video, the government is breaking our legs with high inflation and then offering us a crutch in the form of increased minimum wage rates. But that's not nearly enough to account for the damage that they are doing. And if we do indeed see Australia with 20, 50 or even 100% per annum inflation, or maybe more in the next few years, and I'm talking real inflation, not the CPI, that's going to remain far below that because it'll be manipulated. But in that world, that generous salary package that you negotiated at the start of the year, it's going to suck by the end of the year. That 3-year EBA that you celebrated when you signed it will be sucking you dry by the time it's only halfway through. Salaries and wages lag behind inflation by too much. Products and services, well, they give you more options and more opportunities. And whilst I'm certainly not suggesting that you should quit your job, I am most definitely suggesting that you think about whether it's time to dust off that side hustle idea and get it going so you're no longer completely dependent on your job. Stagflation sucks for everyone, but it doesn't suck equally for everyone. And by giving some thought to how you can hedge yourself against inflation and to how you can earn money in present-day dollars going forward, you can put yourself in a position where our future stagflation sucks a lot less for you and for your family and for your loved ones. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I am 100% viewer-supported. I rely on you guys to keep me going and to help me survive our stagflation future. So, if you appreciate me keeping you up to date, giving you perspective, and helping you to plan for your own life and circumstances, then I'd really appreciate it if you'd help me out by buying me a coffee from topherfield.net, and also check out my best-selling books, my award-winning DVD, my t-shirts, and my hoodies from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Thank you for watching to the end. Please like, comment, subscribe, and as always, stay free.